the ancient number that was typically attributed to this great year cycle was 25,920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our annual year. And just as the annual year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall, likewise the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years. Half the great year, 12,960 years, is it reverses the seasons. So that if we were able to jump in a time machine and go back 12,960 or ahead 12,960, we would find that everything was reversed. If we would keep the same Gregorian calendar in place, the seasons would have been reversed, so that winter would be July and summer would be, in fact, and then what we would see is that hemispherically, like we know that when it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's summer in the southern hemisphere. Well, those seasons would be reversed. They flip. It's a back and forth. It's an oscillation between the 2 hemispheres of the earth over a period of 12,960 years. This shows the wheel of the great year with all of the ages, the astrological months as they're known. And if we were to place ourselves right at this position right here where it says 0 years BP, BP means before present, and it also is 25,920 years. So at least 16 times in the last 150,000 years there have been climate or environmental or geological catastrophes powerful enough that were they to occur today would essentially put us back into the Stone Age. Would essentially, if you think about some of the small catastrophes we have seen in the last few years, from the destruction of New Orleans to the great tsunami, to some of the big earthquakes that we've seen, and now we're talking about the equivalent of 1,000 major cities completely decimated. That's what these are. Once you begin to ponder this, it becomes apparent why there isn't a record, an extant record of what's been going on for the whole time that we humans have been here. Now, you come through that cosmic clock that I showed you, right? Halfway to the cusp of the age of Leo. 12,900 years ago, roughly. And what happened? We have something that happened 12,900 years before present, onset of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, first phase of the megafaunal extinctions. Now here what I've done is I've entered some green dots. Now look at what the green dots are. The green dots are basically derived directly from the model of the great year, based upon cycles of 6,480, 12,960, and then 25,920. And you'll notice how high of a correlation there is between the tempo of events, the actual events that have been derived by scientists without any reference to this great year model at all, and the timing of these ages of the world. And we're now beginning to understand the fine structure of the galaxy, and we realize that there is a pattern and an order to it. And there's a tempo of these orbital revolutions. There's a tempo of the galaxy. And there's a wave pattern of the Earth moving up and down, above and below the galactic plane.
So the ancient Mayas spent lifetimes looking at the constellation Orion. They were looking for creation places in the sky. They wanted to find out their place in the universe, and they wanted to find out the reason for the world that they were living in. And they found a very important creation place in the sky in the constellation of Orion. Is Nebula M4243. Which is right in the center of the 3 Hearthstones. And they saw the whole thing as a major creation center. In the 1990s, the Hubble Space Telescope sent us pictures of Nebula M4243, and they described it as the place where new stars are constantly being born in the universe. The Mayas looked at this place 2,000 years earlier and said, that's the creation center. That's the eye of Hunabku. That's where creation's happening in the universe. So I have no answer for why they happened to pick the right spot 2,000 years before we got it through modern science, but I think it's a very remarkable fact.
Ancient Mayans and the solar calendar and all this was describing that there was going to be an energy event in our solar system resulting from our relationship to the galactic center, which they talked about a lot.
Where our equinox axis is oriented 90 degrees, exactly 90 degrees to the galactic plane, the galactic equatorial plane. When Earth is in that exact stage where we're at right now of the precession of the equinoxes, our axial tilt axis of our planet is also where our magnetic poles are at. Just think of it that way. The magnetic poles of our planet are now lined up perfectly parallel with the galactic equator, right where the concentration of energy is at on the edge of the galactic disk. The northern hemisphere is leaning directly away from the galactic core right now. So if you treated the galactic core as our sun, so that we compare it to our seasonal point of view, well, we're in a winter position.
Any timekeeping comes from that Sphinx, right between the Sphinx's paws, looking due east, watching the sky. That's how the whole calendar system all ties together from that one point. So they're just mapping the movement of our solar system as it's traveling through space. That's what they were doing when they were marking this. It's really quite simple, and that's what the Sphinx is. It's acting as the clock. That's the keeper of the time and where we would view the heavens from Earth to mark any movement.
Well, folks, the summer's going to go out with a roar this year, and the Lion's Gate rolls back around. Start out on the 21st, total solar eclipse. The moon, the sun, and Regulus are all going to be in line. And then on the next day, 22nd, sunrise, the reason for the Sphinx, pointing to the sun rising in Regulus, rising in Leo on the Lion's Gate. The Sphinx is a lion.
Yes, we have right here the actual Revelation 12 sign. And the fact that Saturn, which represents Satan, just so happens to be at the foot right here, right next to the Scorpion constellation, or Scorpius, Scorpion, we see exactly how important this is right before it enters Sagittarius, which also represents what? The horseman, which symbolizes the war to come. So we see exactly how prophetic all of this is in all the signs in the sky. Here's Stellarium once again, and this is where you can see the first star alignment as of 8/5/3914 as it's listed on Stellarium with the negative in front of it. So this is the one that occurred 5,932 years ago. Now, the reason I bring this one up, and the reason this is so interesting and suspicious indeed, is because many attribute this and attest this date to when the creation and the fall of man took place and the fulfillment of Brashayat, or Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 through 17. And also note the rarity of this sign, because we're not going to see it happen again. And even if you look here at Stellarium, at certain ones that really come close to what's talked about in Revelation 12, but not quite exactly, you see that it's almost nearby, because here's one from Stellarium in the year 5101. And then the only other time that even comes close, remotely close, is right here in the year 9052. Now this second final Egypt, which is America, is the final last captivity. Region that they form an X within a 7-year period in is around Cairo, Illinois, around Carbondale, which also just so happens to mean Little Egypt.
So what else is in this area that we need to keep an eye on? 3 guesses, first 2 don't count. Yep, you got it. The New Madrid fault zone. Right below our X marks the spot location. Coincidence? I don't know. As I look at all this evidence, the Lion's Gate, solar eclipse, 7 years in the future, another solar eclipse crossing at this particular location. It is certainly a sign that can't be ignored, folks. It's information, it's data, it's a pattern. We got to pay attention.
Today, we're in what's called the modern warm period, and there's climate mania, even though it's been warmer on Earth many times before. In fact, the trend line shows it's gradually getting cooler because the sun is cooling. Nobody disputes that. Well, no astrophysicists at any rate. The next cold period is signified by the dark blue blob right below climate mania. It's starting now. He used tree rings and sunspot records to plot both temperature and rainfall over that entire period. He identified major climate cycles of 100, 170, 515, and 1030 years. Now, he predicted extreme weather at about the year 2000, followed by a turn colder and a long-term drought. And sure enough, that's exactly what seems to be happening. This chart uses data from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. You can see the large temperature peaks every 1,030 years, the red arrows. These extremely warm and wet periods supported bountiful crops so that major societies grew to the height of their power. Dr. Wheeler called it the civilization cycle. You can see the 172-year peaks as well, the orange arrows. In almost every case, the temperature turned colder at the 172-year mark. Now, 2007 was the most recent major turn date. But the other remarkable thing about this chart is the correlation with major civilizations. When the climate turns warm and wet for long periods, the world's greatest empires have emerged. Egypt, Greece, Rome, the Mayans, the Vikings, and so on. When the climate grew colder, these great cultures fell into ruin. Bad things start to happen when climate turns cold. Rome burned as it got colder. Hadrian's Wall was built to keep out invaders at the bottom of a cold spell. Social mood always turns negative with colder climate, and that brings about riots and wars. Cold periods often get labeled as dark ages. So here we are at the top of the modern warm period. Unless this time is different, the Earth is going to get a lot colder and drier, most likely for several hundred years. We'll also see a major financial collapse. Yeah, that's one of the great features of the 172-year cycle. Now, solar cycles span 11.2 years on average. They've been as long as 17 and as short as 7. The tops of these cycles are characterized by sunspots. Now, they produce solar flares, and they can cause electrical grid breakdown, plane crashes, and radio interference. They're extremely powerful. But what might surprise you is that these electromagnetic waves that shoot towards Earth also have huge influence on how we think and feel. Now, there are lots of studies to back this up. After all, the human brain is an electronic device. Shevensky described an excitability factor that happens in conjunction with the tops of the solar cycles. He found that this high level of solar activity is responsible for civil wars, riots, revolutions, and it had an overall negative effect on human health. He also found that an overwhelmingly high number of historical events happened at the tops of these cycles. Now, just look at this chart of the past 2 cycles, topping around the year 2000 and earlier this year. 9/11, the top of the stock market. Plane crashes, bus crashes, gun violence, the Korean ferry disaster, Malaysian Flight 370. And if you look back through time, major recessions and depressions have followed on the heels of these solar cycle tops. We've just finished a solar cycle top, and we're also grappling with the biggest debt bubble in history. The markets are at ridiculous historical highs.
To my mind, for the world in our time, this lament, this prophecy is speaking directly to us. It's a bit like the Mayan prophecy. Then will the earth tremble, and the sea bear no ships. Heaven will not support the stars in their orbits. All voices of the gods will be forced into silence. The fruits of the earth will rot. The soil will turn barren, and the very air will sicken with sullen stagnation. All things will be disordered and awry. All good will disappear.
I keep hearing that this time is different.